Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about goblins. That's right, except this time it's vintage. There's a vintage goblin deck we get to talk about today. A new deck, well, sort of a new deck that has been sort of under the radar for quite a while in vintage, but the nuts and bolts of this stuff has been legal for quite some time. So it's interesting and exciting, of course, to see this deck pick up and see play, and even get first in one of the more recent vintage challenges. So let's get started. All right. This is really cool. There's some interesting stuff about this deck, a couple of different changes, but a lot of this deck is based on some cards that have already been legal in Vintage forever. Obviously, the big difference between this and Legacy would be the legality of Goblin Recruiter, as well as the importance of fast mana. So, of course, we have Ruby and Lotus, as well as a bunch of Chromox and even some number of Simian Spirit Guide. So that's cool. Obviously, Vintage is a much faster format, and there's less emphasis on grinding because that's, again, there's just decks aren't really sort of set up for that. Things are mostly about just doing your big thing or stopping the opponent from doing a thing. So there's not a ton of like huge importance on card advantage and things like that. Although there is some of that in the deck, like for example Muxus, of course, or Recruiter itself, if you want to play it fairly, so to speak. But yeah, so Vintage is really big focus on speed. Speed's really important, especially since we don't have a ton of great interaction. A lot of it's mostly sorcery speed, although there are things like Rebs and and a few other different cards, uh, different kinds of traps or whatever. And yeah, this is a real deck. It is quite good against decks that like just play a sort of fair game, but spell-based combo is going to be fairly going to be more difficult to beat, or anything that can just anything, or you can still get got, right? It is Vintage, so any deck can just get you. So, but yeah, here's the deck. We got a lot of the same stuff that you've seen before. Lackeys and Scarab Prospectors, and of course good new cards like Trash Master, or I should say Sling Gang. Um, and yeah, so this deck works to make an infinite combo between Snoop and Recruiter, and that's typically how you'll win. It's very, very cheap and easy to set up, only 4 mana, and of course that can be split over multiple turns. So you can have possible turn 2 kills aren't uncommon, as well as the rare turn 1 kill with a Lotus. So that's always kind of neat. It's always good to have that level of speed, and of course you can just win by throwing dudes on board. And this deck, again, nothing too weird here. If you're familiar with the Goblin archetype, typically stuff like Simian Spirit Guide isn't played too often, but again, speed is more important in formats like Vintage than something like Legacy, where you would never play something like Simian Spirit Guide, any sort of Lotus Petal effects. Not that interesting. Chromox obviously very good here. No real downside to it, especially because of Goblin Recruiter, just making sure you never run out of gas, always draw what you need. So pitching random cards to Chromox is not a big deal. Although if you pitch a Torch Courier, you won't be able to combo off on one turn. You'll have to wait until your Snoop gets unsummoning stick. And the mana base, again, same old stuff. Just got random strip mine for additional disruption. And of course, sideboard is mostly just cards that are good against combo decks, although you have stuff like Fury, which is against other creature decks, which is pretty nice. Crater Maker against artifacts, that kind of stuff. Against Needle specifically, that can stop your combo. And of course, ley lines and traps and whatnot. Ricochet Trap is pretty interesting because it's when your opponent plays a spell that targets, you can change the target or whatever. And so, like for a red mana, you can play the trap cost and Ancestral yourself. I'm not sure if this is actually better than just playing a bunch of Rebs, just because Reb hits Tinker, and Tinker is like you basically never win if they Tinker. So cause I mean, best case scenario they'll they'll just get a Dark or a Blightsteel Colossus, and kill you next turn or something. So yeah, I think it's probably more important to play Red Blast, even though the ricochet traps are kind of cute. Um, but yeah, I would say Red Blast probably a little better there. And I guess Red Blast also does kill random blue creatures too. But yeah, this is a deck. Nothing too weird here. Most of the cards you're actually going to be familiar with, but we'll go over some of them. You're probably wondering, of course, how does this deck combo out? Very simply, you play a Snoop, and then if you don't have 2 more mana to play a Recruiter, you'll just pass the turn, then untap with your Snoop in play, so it doesn't have Summoning Sickness, play your Recruiter, and then you put a Kiki Jiki on top. Of course, Snoop gets the Kiki Jiki abilities, and because Snoop isn't a legendary creature, it can copy itself a million, trillion, billion times. And then, yeah, then you copy the Recruiter again, and then you put a Sling Gang on top, or a Mog Fanatic, and you can sack all your Snoops to ping your opponent and then kill them. Now, there are other ways to go infinite with this too, because when you can make the, for example, if your Recruiter dies or something, or there's weird things that can happen. But for example, you don't have any more Sling Gangs in your deck, or you drew your last copy or something. You can make a million Snoops at their end step because the sacrifice occurs at end of turn. So after that occurs in their end step, make a million Snoops, then you untap with all of them, and then you can attack your opponent for 100 or whatever. So that's another way to do it. That's important to remember because again, sometimes you just draw the card you don't want to draw. You want it in your deck. Um, and of course, the Torch Courier is so you can combo out on 1 turn. So all you do is just need an additional red mana to play the Torch Courier, and to give your Snoop haste. So you play your Snoop, play your Torch Courier, sack the Courier to give it haste, make a million thingies, or play your Recruiter, then make a million thingies, and then yeah. So typically your stacks with Recruiter going to be pretty simple. Just going to be, if you're killing that turn, it's just going to be put a Kiki Jiki on top, and if you think there might be some wonky stuff going on, maybe put like another Recruiter under the Kiki Jiki. Obviously, there's going to be a slightly more complicated stacks, but we're not talking like the Food Chain Goblin stacks, which are like you stack literally your all 20 plus goblins. You're not really stacking more than a few. Again, Recruiter, you can do stuff with Muxus, so you will stack 6 cards. Typically, the order doesn't matter because you're going to be putting them all into play with Muxus, so that's always good. But yeah, typically pretty simple stacks. Obviously, there's some a lot of different wonky situations that can happen, but typically, if you're ever unsure, always just put a Recruiter at the bottom of your pile. So when you draw it, you can try again, reset everything, because you'll have more information, more mana, more understanding of what your opponent has to disrupt you and that kind of thing. So, yep, just keep that in mind. When in doubt, just put another Recruiter in your stack. All right, and now we have some extra guys. So, Crater Maker here is a great way to kill Pithing Needle on Snoop, because that'll stop them from activating, right, and killing your opponent. So yeah, so Crater Maker, pretty good there. Again, it just can kill any number of random colorless things, so that's always good. Trash Master, same thing. There's also a ton more decks that play, well, obviously Moxen, right, things like that. So like there's a very real mode of just sacking random crap to basically Stone Rain your opponent a bunch, which is pretty powerful too, as well as just killing random artifacts. Another different card, different named card to kill Pithing Needle. That's a good one too. And of course, the Lord effect lets you helps you beat down. And same thing with Sling Gang and Pashlik. They're just another way to turn all your random goblins into damage and stuff, and pretty sweet there. So yeah, real good stuff here. I'm a big fan of Sling Gang and Pashlik. Obviously, Sling Gang very important to the combo, but just when you need to, those times when you just like they killed all your stuff or whatever, and you're just left with all this crap. Sling Gang and Pashlik can turn a board full of crap into extra damage, more goblins, life gain, drain, all this kind of good stuff. And, you know, get Trash Master can pump all your random dudes. So, you know, that's another, it's important to know, like, maybe you shouldn't, you know, maybe you should just go beatdown mode, right? Maybe that's just the best way to do it, or maybe that's your only option. So again, something to keep in mind. All right, and now we have Twin Shot Sniper, a new card from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and it's basically got the best parts of Tarfire, except mostly upside, right? So you can play it as a 4-mana 2/3 that can shock stuff, you can channel it, which is a big thing, and of course it is uncounterable. When Tarfire was never, you know, the Tarfire could be countered, this one cannot, so it's quite good. It's like almost like a Goblin sudden shock. And if we're looking at the cards here that it can kill, top 10 most played creatures in Vintage, at least according to MTG Goldfish's data, which again, you know, not super mega accurate, but that's okay. We have Collector Oof, Deathrite Shaman, Ragavan, Opposition Agent, Hole Breacher, Lavinia, and sometimes Monastery Mentor. So like around 7, approximately 7 of the creatures in Vintage, top most played creatures, twin shot kills, no muss, no fuss. Mostly. Obviously, Mentor's only a one of, and of course, like, you know, they can pump it if they have an instant or whatever in response. But still, still quite good, very versatile, and so there you go. Yeah, this card does a lot. And of course, having reach means it can block, I don't know, Murktide or something, or I guess Gristlebrand. So yeah, that'll come up too, I guess. So pretty nice little card, and it's easy to cast, just a red and a colorless, and there you go. So yeah, Twin Shot Sniper, definitely a nice inclusion. All right, and there's a few cards that aren't here. First and foremost, I would say Chalice of the Void probably should be here. This deck just doesn't want to be casting like non-goblin cards a lot, and Thorn is not really where you want to be. Chalice is much better, I think, and yeah, very powerful card, very sweet card, and you can, again, it doesn't screw up your curve because you can just go turn 1 like Cavern Lackey into Chalice and just do stuff that way. Whereas, you know, Thorn obviously just isn't that great. Yeah, I would say definitely replacing the Thorn with the Chalice, or at least put the Chalice in the sideboard and just replace the Thorn with something else. That probably should have been done. I just don't think Thorn is really where this deck wants to be. I mean, it's not like one of those aggro shop decks where like Thorn is great, you know. But yeah. So and then of course the other two, which may or may not be more unconventional. A lot of times these decks will play Demonic and Vampiric. Should it have played them? Well, if you think about it, the deck is playing not a ton of black sources, and they're a little worse when you're cutting yourself off from black mana, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And so making the deck more streamlined, more mono red, so you can cast your spells more efficiently, like you won't get mana screwed, stuff like that. Like, that is an interesting idea. And I haven't played the deck enough to really know whether, yeah, you should be playing Vamp or Demonic, but it is an inclusion that seems like, oh, maybe this is weird, or maybe this isn't, but yeah, something to think about. Whereas the Chalice, I definitely think, should be played as the one of. And this is why the deck, in a lot of ways, doesn't have a bunch of Badlands and stuff like that in it, is because it gets turned off by Magus of the Moon. You don't really want to be drawing uncastable cards. And of course, the Sling Gang, you don't really want to be casting because you want it in your deck typically. So yeah, there you go. So Magus of the Moon, another very powerful way to just mana screw people. Especially with something like Trashmaster, where you can cut them off of the relevant colored Moxen. Very sweet. Yeah, Magus is real powerful, especially with all the mana ramp here in this deck, and the deck is mostly mono red, so you can just go like mana screw them with Magus and just beat them with some random dorks over a few turns and kill them that way. So that's pretty sweet. So I'd like the inclusion of Magus. I think that's a very strong, a very powerful card, and probably not something people were expecting at the time, which is probably why he did so well. But yeah, so very, very cool stuff. Very cool technology. I'm a big fan of this guy. Yep, so typically what it's going to be is, yeah, this deck is sweet. If your opponent's just doing fair creature stuff or whatever, they're going to be having a hard time of just competing against, like, them having to kill all your stuff every turn because, of course, Recruiter and then Snoop lets you play stuff off the top, digging into more cards, and then, of course, eventually combo killing them. That's going to be pretty tough for them. There's again, spell-based combos going to be difficult, so things like Doomsday going to be a little tough, right? Because they can just, turn one Doomsday pretty consistently, especially, they have a lot more tutors in Vintage, so that's going to be a much more frequent thing, so that's going to be tough. Of course, you can play more stuff like traps and things like that or whatnot, but not going to be easy. Not going to be easy. And like I said earlier, yeah, you can just get type 1. Like, people just can just do ridiculous stuff. They can just get completely busted openings, right? So, any deck can, like, just smash you, just unbelievably. You're just like, oh, whoop, wow, you drew Shop into, Trinisphere, and then you played like 100 guys, and you kept me under 3 lands, stuff like that. Like, even though the Shop decks are going to be pretty good, minus sometimes they can get, Needle and stuff off of Saga, but yeah, anyways, so definitely an underplayed deck. I think Vintage is a little bit underexplored for some of these archetypes. We do see a little bit of like the random creature-based stuff. You see like Death and Taxes style things, and of course, obviously there's a lot of different blue pile, aggro control / mid-range style things. There's a bunch of those. Whether it's like blue, black, green bug pile with Deathrite Shaman and Oko and stuff, or it's this Ragavan weird pile with Dreadhorde Arcanist and just like, whatever. So yeah, these non-blue strategies are definitely underexplored, but I think it certainly has a niche. I think it's quite good. And yeah, man, this deck could be so much better with unrestricted Misstep or Chalice. Yeah, Misstep is just awesome. Definitely one of my favorite cards. I mean, it was one of my favorite cards in Goblins when it was legal, and then yeah, being able to play it in Vintage would have been awesome. But hey, what are you gonna do, right? Mental Misstep's a pretty wonky card. I don't know, but anyways, there you go. I should probably mention I will put the link for the Vintage MTGO challenge. I'll put it in the description, so you can look at the deck and all the other decks and stuff. And the deck's actually reasonably affordable. It's only a couple hundred ticks on MTGO, so that's sweet. Big fan of that, so that's cool. But yeah, not much else to say. Pretty sweet deck, lots of cool stuff going on here. And yeah, there you go. So thanks for stopping by, guys. I hope you enjoyed this, and have a great day.